church and state. However, if if you're running for president, for example, it's just a broad example, but if you're running for president, if you're an atheist, that's the worst thing you could possibly do. Which leads me to the next question. Does the belief in evolution lead to atheism? And if not, then how can you combine religion and science and accepting evolution to be able to have both?
I mean, there are several examples here. The best example is Charles Darwin himself. Charles Darwin was trained as a clergyman, graduated 10th in his class at Cambridge, at Christ College, which was a preeminent place to train clergymen in England for the Anglican Church. He did not go on into the clergy, obviously because of his science. But the really odd thing there is it wasn't necessarily himself not doing that alone. His own professors, who were clergymen and also scientists, because for many, many centuries it was the clergymen that were the scientists as well. And they're the ones that told him, in a sense, if you don't use this gift you have, again, given you by God, the way they saw it, the way he saw it, then you're robbing God of the knowledge he can give all of us. And so that it was Darwin's obligation to do this. And Darwin had no problem with doing this. I mean, this is what made him tick. There's a book out now, I think it's called Outliers, and a few others, talking about people that are, just a little bit different and society isn't quite fit to them. And he was a person like that. He was obsessed with nature. There's stories that, he would go and lay in his bed at night to go to sleep, and he would just think and think and think about these things. He just couldn't not do so. It was really kind of who he was. And you all have strengths that are part of who you are and what makes you feel like you feel fulfilled and you're meeting your promise. And if you're not there yet, you'll find that place. And he had found his place at a very young age. But remember, society didn't want that for him. His father was quite an ogre and really suppressed any interest in nature at all in him. Thought it was a waste of time. It was, the work of deadbeats and the rest. He was to be a doctor. He loved the workings of the body. There are other things he was fascinated about in medical school, but then the surgeries disgusted him because there was very little anesthesia, and the surgeries were getting more and more complex. So you have longer and longer operations, people writhing and screaming on a table, and he had a problem with that. I mean, he was a very compassionate person. He was a religious person his whole life. He went from probably a standard theist, would have been an Anglican minister and all that, and through his life transferred maybe over to a deist, some say agnostic, where believing in a God that maybe unfolded everything. And this is why he felt the need, as Ted brought up earlier, to put creator in there. He felt the need to do that because that was a personal thing, but he wanted to put it in a poetic way, which he does at the end. And he wanted to do it in a way to separate it from the research, saying, I can't let you, there's no way you can validate this. I understand that. But I just want you to know, this is how I feel. This is my thing. And so he's the perfect mix of religion and science. Why do people miss this? Because most of the things on the internet that talk about Charles Darwin and condemn him rarely, if ever, discuss that he knew anything about religion. In fact, usually they say if he only knew about religion, it's a shame he didn't have a Christian education, or so forth. It's quite ridiculous, but this is what people do. Why not condemn something without looking at it first, right? I don't need to know what's in that book to burn it. The famous statements about his book as it was released in 1859, and still statements made by some leaders still today. It's really sad. How do you reject something that you've not looked at? Gnosis and understanding you can reject, but you cannot reject what you don't know. I mean, it's just common sense. So they can coexist, and Charles Darwin gives us the model for that. On that point, Kenneth Miller is probably the newest proponent of that over at Brown University. When I was in graduate school back east, I had a friend that went there and took classes from him and so forth. And he really does a great job at talking about both sides and how they both can fit. What you're looking at here is, remember that religion is in a sense very interpretive or hermeneutical. Okay? Therefore, you can reinterpret the information, whether it's the 7 days of God, the 7 days of organization, and so forth, to 7 days that are literal days, 24-hour days, or are they millions or billions of years. And this is something that all major, in a sense, groups across, quote, the Abrahamic faith have made their peace with. It's only in certain fundamental groups where they reject this outright. And some are extreme, like the young earth creationists, other groups where they say they won't accept geology, they won't accept any science at all, that it's all illusory, and and it's, you know, this big fraud and conspiracy that's out there. On the other end of that would be a Dawkins, probably, and there's some farther down the line, probably Harris, as we were talking earlier. Dawkins rejects God in his sense, but he knows statistically that there is a possibility of God. So the scientist in him allows for a possibility, although small as it might be. Where Sam Harris might not ground you down. I mean, I guess if you really pinned him down, he would. Because you would have to be, without science, to reject it completely. Okay? There's no way to absolutely know there is no God. At the same time, there's no absolute way to know there is. And there are people that on the reverse side say, I know absolutely. How? I just know, because it feels right. Well, is that scientific evidence? That might work for you, but that's not science. And that's because religion is different than science. And so you want to take religion as faith and science as facts, and that's what you work with. And you shouldn't have a trouble between the two. They can commingle. It's okay. They always have. And I like to say that science has been dragging religion through the centuries. Because as science moves forward with huge leaps, originally religion will reject those things if they feel they contradict or interfere or whatever. And as time goes on, they feel like all the benefits they get, for example, in evolution with medicine, we can't reject that. If we do, our people suffer. That wouldn't be religious. So they come along for the ride eventually. So I think this is just a moot point. But at the same time, this is something our country loves to propagate in such a high degree to get the hardcore fundamentalists on either side, whether you're hardcore atheist, hardcore that's religious person, to fight it out and have a boxing match continually. Instead of having reason, compromise, logic, I don't know.
Okay.
I rambled there. So.
Let me just quickly add to that. I largely agree. I was just reading an interesting quote in a new biography of the young Darwin by Keith Thompson, and he says that in that book, science does not make religious belief impossible, but it makes non-belief possible. So the relationship between science and religious belief, clearly there are atheists or agnostics who are scientists, and that's fine, but that is not the only option. There are plenty of scientists out there who are doing good science, who have religious beliefs, and don't see any conflict between the two. But I'd add to that the most important new work on Darwin that's just come out is called Darwin's Sacred Cause by two historians who wrote an earlier book, biography of Darwin, Adrian Desmond and James Moore. And in that book, they really stress the abolitionist, anti-slavery passion that's very distinctive about Darwin's and his wife Emma's families. They were very committed in England in the 18th and early 19th centuries, and Darwin inherited this hatred of slavery. And many of the justifications for slavery that were emerging in the 19th century actually claimed that you had separate creations. You had Europeans, and you had Africans, and you had Asians, and indigenous peoples, all separately created, unequally, and to stress the superiority of the Europeans who were going to either take care of or, if necessary, eliminate the lesser among us. Darwin rejects that. Darwin argues for common descent. Right? And this, I think, stress on our common humanity is not only distinctive of Darwin, it's distinctive of anybody who believes that God created the world, regardless of how you think he created it, or she created it, or how it came about in Genesis. You're taking Genesis as science, which I don't think there's any good reason to do so. But the stress on the common humanity is something that I think, at an ethical and political level, is very important to bridge this gulf. And whether that is enough, I don't know. I'm sure there are going to be lots of interesting questions that we get today.
Yeah, we want to make sure we save time. So.
Yeah, well, just have one last question.
Okay.
In the recent years, we've seen a certain backlash